Hi everyone, today we're going to talk about decreasing, and in this case decreasing on the flexee, and that you knit a knit 3 together where you decrease 2 stitches. I'll show you in this video examples how you can do such a K to talk, and also how you can apply that knit together to your head. Then I will show you some pictures of different possibilities. Here I have an example of a pointy hat or a conical cap. With that point of the hat you can play with your number of rows, but also with your number of decreases. It's just how pointy you want that hat to be. Whether you are going to decrease it around 6 to 10 rows, but also the number of decreases you do in such a row. So you can play with your decreases, and around the number of rows you do those decreases. A knit 3 together is a very nice way of decreasing, and you can also apply it to different kinds of hats, and then they all look different. Also, the number of stitches of the hat determine how the hat will look alike. With a beanie with bulky yarn you need less stitches than with chunky yarn, so you'll have to decrease the amount of stitches in a row more often, or you will reduce more rows with chunky yarn. With this hat, for example, there are only 4 decreases in one spot. And of course you can also use your stitch combination, which means that you look at your hat and look what you have done. Here's a hat where I used a stitch combination of a 3 knit, purl 2, knit 3 and purl 2, and with this one I decreased where I'd knitted a knit 3 knit stitches, and this one has a pretty short crown, and that's because of the amount of decreases. In this black hat I have decreased alternately. With the number of stitches it turned out well that I could do that alternately. So my first knit 3 stitches, that's where I decreased. My second section of knit 3 stitches I didn't decrease, so actually I skipped that one. So this crown is longer, so more rows and less decreases. So the odds have been decreased, and the evens, there you see a little bar which has been skipped in this case. The more decreases, the shorter the crown of your head. You take that into account at the moment you start knitting your head. So you can determine in advance how long the section will become before you start decreasing it, so the part of the head. And of course you can always use a lifeline, which you then put in at the moment you are going to decrease. With these two last heads, the black and the colored, you always knit 1 row with decreases and 1 row without decreases, so that the decreases merge nicely into each other and almost look like a straight line. It's almost like you're having a kind of decorative way to use on your head, so the crown looks even more beautiful, and no bump at the top, because you are decreasing to an amount of stitches of between 8 and 10, or the way you want it. As you can see, there are several possible applications, and now I'm going to show you how you can make this smaller, so you can make a kind of crown closure towards the top. So you start decreasing halfway from 58 to 50 and to 42, etc. This means that you start, for example, with 66 stitches, and in this case each time you decrease 8 stitches per section. And you do that with a knit 3 together. Then the hat can go into a point like this one, but you can also make a round crown out of it. Then you also do that a number of times, and then divide over 4 parts or compartments, and then each time you do a row with those decreases and a row without those decreases, and you alternate that. When you are using a knit 3 together, you can remove one link in one go with a flexee, so that's an advantage. So you knit 3 together and you can remove one link. Then you don't have to move any stitches at all, as you would have to do with a knit 2 together. In the example I'm using this gnome, and actually that's the top of my Christmas tree hat I just showed you. And here I start with 26 stitches, then I go to 18 stitches and then to 10. You can decrease to 8 stitches on the flexee and then you still can knit around. After that you do a drawstring cast off. A video of that drawstring cast off is also on this channel. There are several ways how to do this. I'll just show you some examples on how you can do it. In this case I made it like a pointed cap, and if you want to make a beanie, for example, then you also have a number of stitches, and then you actually have to make sure that you can always divide those stitches by 4, so you get 4 equal sections, or another number of course. So actually from one decrease to the other decrease, the number of stitches in between, that's always the same, so that you get 4 equal parts if you use 4 decreases. Knit 3 together. So if you divide it the right way, it will look the most beautiful. The black and colored hat are not done on the flexee, but they are both knitted with knit 3 together, and that's why I'm showing it to you, so you know how a K3 talk is done and how it looks on such a hat. And of course each hat has its own number of stitches and rows, and you do, for example, 4 times a K3 talk. A knit 3 together, that means that you decrease 2 stitches at that moment, and then you can calculate about how many rows you would need before you're at the top. Then you also know about where or when you need to decrease for this top. And of course you can also divide it into multiple compartments, 7, 8 or 9, no matter what you want. If the number of stitches between those knit 3 together remains the same, that they are equal. And of course you can always use a lifeline, so it's easier to put back. Well, the knit 3 together, I'm going to show you that one. I've got the loom and the hat, and as you can see this is my beginning pack, because unfortunately I don't have an anchor pack here, and I've divided the hat neatly into 4 parts. All 4 parts are equal, and with this number you can make it equal, but you can also decide when you have an odd number that you do 5 and the other one 6 and then 5, so alternately, as long as it looks almost equal, so there's always a solution to that. The most beautiful is of course if every compartment is equal, so you count every 6 pack has a marker here. What do you do now? You continue with the stitch you are knitting in the direction of your marker. Then you don't knit up to your marker, but up to 1 stitch before the marker. So this is what you do, up to 1 stitch before your marker. This stitch will always be your center stitch. Would you like to do your hat as shown in the picture? That's important. With the Christmas tree hats this is a bit, not that important, because then the decrease is beneath a bump. But if you would like to keep it straight and above each other, then you have to keep this stitch as the center stitch. Every next decrease will be above this stitch, so then you won't see it zigzag. For me, it's convenient to use a stitch holder. You can also use a cable needle, and you can even use a hairpin or a piece of thread, as long as you can put the stitch on something. For convenience, I will call this one the center stitch, and then I take off the stitches that are around that center stitch. You see that the stitch holder takes a stitch off in a second. The cable needle is a bit more difficult, but it is possible. Just search for a way or find a way that's convenient to you. And then you take a closer look at your flexee. Here a link with 2 bags and one is empty. The other one is actually filled, so the most convenient is, because there is also an empty one here, to move this stitch to this spot. It could also happen that if you are knitting with an odd number or something like that, that you would have to move it to this link. I'm going to demonstrate it to you, and now we keep the links together. Then you have to put a little more pressure on your knitting, but you can also separate them from each other. I will show you that later. So more methods to be possible. You move your center stitch. If you try to maintain the same order, nothing can actually go wrong. You put the marker back immediately so that you know at your next decrease row that this is the stitch that will come to the front then, because we are going to put it back and then you knit the stitch. Then this stitch will actually come on top of your fabric, so these two will fall behind that stitch. Now you remove the link that no longer has stitches on it, because you have now decreased 2 stitches. You take them out, or you take the link out, and you put the flexee back together. And now you have 2 individual stitches, and to make it always look the same, it's important that you, and then it doesn't matter from which side you put the stitches back on, that you always do it the same way. Either on the left you do first, or on the right you do first and after that. So that's important. And what is also worth looking at is that you put the stitch back straight, so as a knit stitch, as a real knit stitch, because you are knitting knit stitch over here and not an E-wrap. If you're knitting an E-wrap, then of course it has to be put back as an E-wrap, so you make sure your stitch look exactly the way it should look. Center stitch, put it back on, and from now on I'm going to put my left stitch back as first on the center stitch, and with all my decreases in this hat. And then the right stitch, check if it is not twisted, and if it's twisted, so you twist your stitch holder around until you see that the stitch just looks like it's supposed to look, and you put it back on with the other 2. I was knitting a true knit. When with that true knit it's a little bit more difficult to knit this knit 3 together. If you notice that, and you take some strings at the inside of those 3, and then you can all say, I knit a very loose U-wrap, and then I'll just adjust it to the other stitches. Look, that's a bit easier, and of course you can knit over those 3 stitches one by one as well. And always check, knitting has everything to do with tension, that the tension is right there, because otherwise you're going to see it. That was your decrease, or your first decrease, and 2 stitches are decreased here. Then you knit to your next one. Actually you should look at it like this. You knit 3 knits in this row and you decrease, and in your next row with less stitches it might be 2 knits and then a knit 3 together, or 1 knit and a knit 3 together, and that continues of course to the top or crown of the hat. And well, the same drill. You put those 2 surrounding stitches on the help needles. Look at what's handy. Where can you put it the best? Well, you see it here, an empty spot, and here an empty peg, but here you continue to knit, so then it's most convenient to detach it here. can already take them apart, and you get also a little bit less tension on your fabric. So then you also see that it's easier to put the stitch back on. Then you detach that link. Oops, almost forgot to mark it back at the center stitch. You push or adjust the links back together again, and I always did the left stitch first and then the right stitch, and you check of course if it is not twisted, so turn it around until you see it is a real knit stitch. Well, you can try a real true knit over here, but it's tricky sometimes. It's actually 3 stitches that has to be knitted over. Check your tension again, and then you knit a 3 knit again, and in another row that may be 6, and then a decrease, or 2 and then a decrease. That's what's possible too, of course. The most important thing is that you pay attention, that you don't get too much tension on the fabric, because you have to pull gigantic hard on the stitch to move it, and that's the nice thing about the flexee. You can actually use it to reduce the tension there as well. And here we go again, one more time, a decrease, and then you put them both on the needles. You take your marker off, and in this case it's handy to put it here again. You put it on the back, you put your marker back on, and well, in this case it was pretty easy. But at the moment you feel pressure on it, just disconnect the link, because you see it, you just get less tension, or that your fabric is stretched out, and it shouldn't be that you have to hang and strangle those stitches back on. Well, check left stitch, check the right stitch, put it back on, and check marker, and you knit the stitch. You knit 3 together. That was your third one. We're going to do it one more time. I also show you what you can do with your starting or beginning pack. You are going to have it at some point that you are actually going to take your beginning pack with you in that decrease, and of course you still need to know when or where you have to do another new row. And it's actually not that hard, but you especially when you knit a hat or a beanie, because then you still have to knit a whole knit row without decreases in between. So you actually do exactly the same thing as you have done before. I'll take it off right now. Just put the flexee wherever you want it to be, so take advantage of that flexibility. So at the back or at the front, whatever is easy and convenient. This is my marker, which I needed for the decreases, and now my beginning back marker also becomes the one with for the decreases. But at least then I know that I'm there at the beginning of my row. Then you take the link out and you put them back together again. Left back well, and then you put your right stitch back on, and you continue knitting. Well, as you can see, it has become a lot smaller, so I decreased from 24 stitches to 16. 24 minus 8 is 16. I took out 4 links from, yeah, 4 links with 2 packs on it. So I decreased the total amount of 8 stitches. And you can keep on doing this until you get at a point where you can't go or knit any further. Okay, this was it again for this time. Decreases on the use of a knit 3 together, a K3 talk they sometimes call it. And so you actually get a very beautiful crown. But of course you can also use it to let the hat actually flow into a point, and then you can use it every six row, for example, until you have a pointed cap or conical cap the way you want it. Thanks for watching, and hope to see you next time.